Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. I recently got to sit down with Trip Miller for a conversation about knives and life and building businesses, and this is part 2 of a 2-part series. I hope you enjoy. Yeah. Well, and my price range is from like maybe about $275. So I'm not talking about fixed blades and pocket knives, but $275 to $900, and it all depends on material. Like I don't charge an incredible amount for time. It's really like replacement on materials. So if I'm putting some real nice mammoth ivory or something like that on it that costs like $300 or $400, well, I mean, that's just what I wrap into the cost. But, you know, like a stock knife, like even on the slip joints, I decided pretty early on that I was going to try to offer something more than just some basic new micartas and things, and I was going to charge about $350, $325 to $350, and I thought that was fair. But sometimes I wonder if maybe I should have started lower. Like pricing work out when you spend as much time on it as a maker does is sometimes a really hard thing to do, because you know you want to value your time and everything. And somebody reminded me, I sold a car one time, and I think I sold it for under $1,000. And I had like 30, 40 people hit me up. I think it was on Craigslist back in the day. And I said, oh, I sold this pretty quick. And somebody said, well, you sold it too cheap then. And I've always wondered in some ways if the price point is too high for some people, because I don't think that, like, I'm not immovable on price per each piece, but I also want to make sure that if I'm making a knife that is the same as another person's knife that I sold for like $400, I don't know if it's fair to undercut my my secondary market and sell it for $250 if I really needed the money or whatever. Like I don't, it's stuff like that. Like what kind of duty do you have as a knife maker to sell at a consistent price? And be immovable on that because maybe one person bought it at what they thought it was valued at versus another because you need the money or because you get self-conscious about it.
That's a great topic, because I've certainly seen. So I will say right up front, I am not a fixed blade expert by any means. I buy and sell them here and there, and you catch me at an interesting time because I'm kind of doing my own little due diligence on possibly building a little bit of a fixed blade collection. And, I've dabbled in them here and there and bought them here and there, but I really don't know my way around all the makers and all the different price points and necessarily all the different patterns and why what is what and so forth. I mean, I'm certainly knowledgeable enough to be dangerous and have been around in the knife hobby for long enough to know enough stuff, but at the level, let's say, that I know, like my slip joints and some of those makers and some of those patterns and so forth, I'm not at that level with the fixed blade, so it's hard for me to speak to exactly price points, I would say, knowledge-wise in that area. But I mean, just to kind of maybe comment on what you just said, I mean, for something that's handmade, I do feel like there's a floor, sort of, right? Like, I mean, obviously you throw in mammoth ivory or any expensive material, you need to pass on the material cost to the best of your ability, including, let's say, fancier steels if you use Damascus or something that you're sourcing otherwise, what have you. But there's a difference between something that's handmade, in my opinion, and something that you is a production piece that you can go buy, well, give any online retailer or whatever, or walk into, the store and purchase. And so there is sort of in my mind, a bottom line number, and I have a hard time believing that, let's say even a fixed blade world, I have a hard time believing that something less than $250 anyway makes much sense to me. I don't know that that doesn't sound too high, I guess is what I'm trying to say, to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think that what I've kind of discovered is that there's tiers of prices in general. There's the free to 300, and that's usually the category that a lot of very new knife makers sit in. There's like 301 to maybe about 850, and then there's like 851 or whatever and higher. And what I notice is like when you get into higher end or higher cost knives, sometimes like collectors will look at your work and say you're under the money because they want pieces that represent a value system in their collection across all their knives. So it's like, okay, well, I have these ones, and like the value of my collection is like $50,000, and I don't collect a knife that I've paid under $1,200 for. And it seems like money and bragging rights or whatever is not necessarily analogous to quality. Although, like, arguably, like anybody who's charging like $1,200 for a knife, it needs to be good. But like you can find in the slip joint market where it's a reasonably built slip joint or whatever, but because it has, I don't know, $400 pair of like a blue green mammoth ivory. Yeah, it automatically jacks it up. So whereas maybe they were charging $450, well, now that's a $900 slip joint. And for a single blade, or maybe like a double blade, like a two blade trapper or something, they're charging more because of handle material prices. And like for me, that's a little bit disingenuous in some ways because the pricing might not necessarily match the work, but because of the material, it kind of slaps the lipstick on the pig.
Well, I think the past few years we've seen prices go up, and up too. I mean, it's kind of interesting that we talk about in terms of 1,200 here, 900 there, $900 slip joints, and so forth. Because while a lot of I will raise my hand and say I'm guilty of kind of falling into the higher price point sort of knives in most cases. At the same time, I'm also a big fan of spending less and having great quality too. And so seeking that out is something that is appealing to me as far as like the newer maker, if you will, or newer to the scene maker, if you will. There is an appeal in finding those sweet spots, as you described, a tier of price points kind of inside of a collection, a value tier, if you will. And of course, that's what I see as value and what someone else sees as value are two different things, right? I mean, it's the old what they're willing to pay for it, that type of thing. But if you have somebody that's a little experienced that knows what they're looking at, and you're offering a product that definitely got the quality and so forth, and it's out there at $400 or something like that. I mean, I would think that's no problem. I do think that what you're saying is correct, what you're getting at, which is there is a tier sort of that pushes you into, as you said, if I go throw this expensive material on it, and or let's say it's got expensive steel, and all of a sudden because of the materials, material cost alone, I've got, I don't know, pick a number, $500-600 in it, something along that line. I mean, now you have to decide, right? What's my time worth, or do I need to? How bad do I need the money back, or what was this exercise for? So you will, I suspect. I mean, there is a tier there where a newer maker, in my opinion, it's much harder to sell over, $800-900. Certainly, once you approach $1,000 number, and that would be true, in my opinion, also in slip joints too, in the slip joint world. I mean, I'm friends with Brett Dowell, and he makes a hell of a slip joint at a price point that's on sub 1,000 and is hard to compete with when it comes to quality. And he's been in those price ranges for a long time, and he's been $600, $700, $800, $600, $750, stuff like that for a long, long time. And he makes a great knife. And I can think of multiple other makers that I won't go through a list of names, but I can think of multiple other makers that are out there that are sub those numbers that do a pretty good job too. I don't collect a lot of them because it's not really what I'm looking for in my collection and in my journey, but there are people who do, and everyone's different. And that's the thing about, I think, this hobby and life in general. It's everybody's got a different path, and everybody's got different tastes, and everybody's got different things, the reasons they collect, their motivations, and why. And so, as a maker, you're trying to also figure that out. Who is my customer? What do they want? And also never, what I just said. Who's my competition? I mean, you don't singularly exist in the world of knife makers alone here. You do have people that are out there that are somewhat competing for market share, even though you probably don't think of it like that. I do, as a buyer, think of it like that. I think of it like, well, for my money, I'm going here because because of various reasons, as opposed to trying to maybe say go find a new slip joint maker and try to start down that path. Maybe I don't really want to go back and start down that growth path with somebody. I want to go with something established that I know, a known quantity, that kind of thing. I've got various reasons. I've collected for a long time Enrique Peña's knives, very specific Enrique Peña knives between 2010 and 2015. Slip joints only, traditional, old stamp, but there's not a lot of them around anymore. I find one or two here or there. I know a few people with collections. I've got lines in the water always, so that, when somebody decides they're going to sell one, I hope I get the call first. A lot of times I do, but that's because I work at that and I spend time cultivating that. So that's one part of my collection that, I'm always want to have free capital, if you will, to buy that if it comes up, that kind of thing. And then, I've got a few other folks that I collect and so forth. And so I'm always trying to make that decision between where I put my money kind of part. And I might not want it to be diluted down over on something new that I'm not as sure about. So breaking in through that piece, I think for as a newer collector, if I was talking about trying to go out and chase a new maker, that's kind of the hard part to get to me, is to get me to actually spend my hard-earned money there when I've got other things going on in other areas and so forth of my collection.
Yeah. Well, I think that the secondary market is a really important component of the psychology of buying, right? Because, and I'm reminded, Tony Bose had a really good value knife that he knew that he could have charged a lot more for because of the secondary market, and he still chose to keep his prices pretty static, except there towards the very end, right? And so to me, it's always interested me in how a customer maintains equity in a knife, right? So you buy it at maybe, I don't know, there's lots of really great slip joint makers that you can buy a sub $1,000, so maybe $850 for a nice single blade, and they know that they probably could get $1,400 for that thing, but they still charge $800. So instantaneously, you buy it, you have $400 in equity in it, approximately, right? And that's that to me is something that is interesting because I would prefer if when somebody bought a knife from me that they could go out and sell it for as much or more than they paid for it. And that's the kind of market that I really kind of want to cultivate around my knives, is that it doesn't do me any good for you to buy a boat anchor. And as much as we talk about art and self-expression and everything, the thing that I want you to see is a value in the knife, but then also a value in the ability to recoup your expenditures if they ever come to a place where you just don't want it anymore. 'Cause I can't buy back all the knives that I've sold. I can't be the single source of helping you out if you're down on your luck. But I would like to know that the market will support that.
Yeah, I mean, the secondary market's a very interesting animal, if you will, and I know it pretty well, at least in my little world, in my slice of knives that I kind of pay attention about too. I know the secondary markets for all my makers and the people I'm looking for and so forth. I have a pretty good idea of how that works, and it is something that comes up in conversation between colleagues and friends in this hobby. We'll talk about that, which is that equity position that you speak of, which is do you leave the equity in the deal as the maker, or do you try to take all the equity out of the deal and price at table, but now are you priced all the way, all the money, so there's nothing in it? So, do you, and that's a conscious decision, obviously, as a maker. You can make that call, right? You can look at it, and I'm sure that there's moments in time where certain makers are like, man, I need to just be charging all the money since it's out there. I should be taking it for myself. And I mean, I wouldn't begrudge anybody that right to do that. I think certainly that's your right to do it. What you're getting, I think what you're talking about though is what's the sweet spot for my business growth model, because there is a curve there, in my opinion. There's a curve there where, if perceived as a value with a little bit of upside, you might have more potential entries into that. And I would definitely say, I mean, I can say for sure for me, especially with somebody that I was trying to get into newer, that would play a part in my decision as to whether or not I would be willing to just say, write a check for $600, $800, $900 for this on this new XYZ maker. It would be, if there is some upside in it, then I know I'm safe in that investment that way, as opposed to I'm just going to take a $500 bath right off the top if I get this in hand and I don't like it. And therein lies that conundrum of, in our world, where unless you do go to a show or have access to this stuff, there is nowhere to go touch this stuff. There's nowhere to feel it. There's nowhere to, which is why, again, like somebody like yourself, it's pressing the flesh, as I said earlier. There's really no replacement for it. You can't really do enough shows. You can't really be in front of enough people and in face to face. You really can't, especially at this particular juncture, or with any, let's just say, any newer maker. And even the older makers and the ones that have been around. I mean, it's still important to be out there, but you might not have to be out there as much, because people will seek you out and they will buy your wares without, because you have a reputation at that point. But I think earlier on in the curve of things, I do agree with you that trying to find your market, find your customer who appreciates your work for what it is and sees value in it, and that then drives that value into the secondary market. They're out. I mean, nobody wants to buy something and say, look at this, I'm going to take a loss on everything I just bought. Everybody, when you buy it, you really want to be able to say, yeah, I could make an extra $200 or $300 on this, or it is worth this. I'm selling it for this because it's worth it, that kind of thing. And then you've got that kind of momentum going for you, I think, in the secondary market like that. And it happens. And I've seen it with a lot of makers, and I've seen a lot of makers too, kind of do a little, I've seen them go up and down too. I've done that with, Ricardo Romano, also a great guy. Love him. Got a lot of his knives. His market's been it dips and ebbs and flows. Ryuichi Kawamura, I've got a bunch of his knives. Haven't met him. But there's a point in time where you could buy his knives on secondary he was always above. It seemed he was priced, $12, $13, $1,400 per, give or take. Certainly, in my opinion, worth that. But then secondary would come along and you could buy them for $800. Not so much today at the moment, but in the most recent 5-6 years that was true. And now he's come back around full circle, and his books are pushed back a couple years now, and people kind of caught on. He caught on a little more. Kind of the secret was out. It was always around though, because Tony Bowes, knew him and said he was one of the best knife makers in the world. Pretty much. He said that a long time ago about the guy. And he is, in my opinion. Slip joints, let's say. But, but sometimes you're hot and sometimes you're not. And in his particular case, for a while there, it just wasn't there weren't anyone buying his knives, really. Not in secondary at above table price. Now, he is priced up some too, though. So he's kind of taken a little, if you go to get a new knife from him, his price points have moved up into that 1,800 range on multi-blades, stuff like that. So, he's pricing himself, in my opinion, about what secondary is on most of the knives. There's a couple of examples that'll go higher, and most will probably not. It just depends on the patterns and things of this nature, so it depends. Now, he's an established guy. He's getting a little older, and he, I'm sure that's reasons why maybe Tony decided to raise his prices at one point, was because he knew he could, but he's also probably getting older, saying to himself, I need to, have some retirement, et cetera, so I need to go on and capitalize on this. More power to him, But so I wouldn't begrudge anybody that opportunity, but I do agree with you that I think tapping into knowing, really it comes down to, in my opinion, knowing your market and knowing your competition and sort of figuring out where you fit in, kind of back to your analogy of the companies that built America kind of thing, really knowing what you're doing, on what is your mission, believing in that, and finding the need, the customer. And so if you can align those things, then you can grow your brand, and you will see an upside, and you'll see continual, in my opinion, you'll see continual demand on your product. You should, especially if you're producing something really good that's handmade. There are enough buyers out there, and there's enough money out there. So you have to connect those dots, is what I think is how that happens.
Yeah, yeah. There's an entire psychology to the market, because like dealers and collectors like you really set the price point that a maker can achieve. Because I could sell a knife for 350 or $400, and if you buy that and you'll buy up whatever it is I make at that price point, then everybody else will
Right.
buy it for that if you sell it again. But I can't dictate that. Not only is it a certain level of psychological warfare, I think, on customers, but I don't dictate that at all. So Maker just kind of like puts it out there and maybe can play the system, but it's dealers and collectors, because an average user of my knife, they get one knife, they paid $350 for it, and that's a single purchase that they're going to make for their lifetime. They want to pass it on to their kids, and they don't really do a
Right.
bunch of knife dabbling. But that's kind of the deal, is like the after or secondary market is really dictated by dealers and collectors, and that is kind of where I think you probably could have a lot of interesting conversations in collector circles about ways to artificially inflate the market, because you really kind of have that power. Like, it's almost outside of the maker's hands entirely. The only benefit that a maker has is being able to charge more for that as an entry, like
Mm-hmm.
the table price, after you've decided on how much
Right.
it's worth as collectors.
No, I mean, I saw that Jared, back to Jared Ozer, I saw that with him. I mean, most of his knives when he first started making them were about $700, give or take, six, seven, 750, and they stayed there for a number of years. He kept those prices in that range, kind of that sub thousand, and I would say probably for 4 years, maybe five, give or take. But then the secondary market, for his stuff was red hot. Like, it was just on fire, online, and specifically in the Facebook groups and stuff. And rightfully so. I mean, his work is impeccable, and his design ethos and aesthetic is fantastic. And so, very quickly he went from making the just true traditional patterns to his own designs. I liken it to, like, in the music world, going from being a cover band to writing your own music, right? And so he, once he started doing that, and he saw the demand for, in the secondary, he definitely started creeping up and creeping up and creeping. But he's done it over a number of years, really. I think he's been making knives for about 12 years, 11, 11 to 13 years. And he's now hitting a point where his price points are up there, as far as like just a table type knife. I mean, we're talking 1,700, 1,800, $2,000. The fancier stuff, maybe even a little higher. He lets lotteries and auctions, actually lets auctions drive some of those, because usually the auctions will go higher, right? Typically, so they'll help drag stuff up into stratospheric kind of levels that, I don't think as a maker he would want to charge necessarily. Again, I use air quotes, want to charge. Of course, he'd want to, but not to the extent of driving people away, right? Not on a regular price point basis. But he really, I think, is a good example of somebody that did that in a very smart curve or timeline over really paying attention to the demand, but not necessarily trying to take all the equity out of every knife and so forth. And he's been able to really sustain, and for the most part, most of his models and so forth have sustained or still go for higher. We've just started to see in the last maybe year or two, I've started to see some of the older stuff, little less interesting to maybe some of the newer guys getting into it, and they want the newest stuff and they'll pay for the newest stuff. They won't pay for the older stuff, that kind of stuff. I've seen a little of that. So we've seen some of the heat come off a little bit, but it's all relative. And, most of those knives that we're talking about are still selling for more than what they sold for at table, that kind of thing, or certainly about what they sold for at table, somewhere in that range. So we're not really seeing, necessarily, the secondary market may be taking a little bit of a hit, but as far as like his own personal stock of where his knife sold at and what the equity is in it, it's not selling for below what he originally would have charged for that knife, that kind of thing, So he's done a really good job, and he's pretty prolific. I mean, he makes, at this point, he's got a lot of knives out there, so it's not like there's like a lack of, there are knives, but they just stay in demand, and the price points have gotten to the point where, people pay it, and they're pretty high. We're talking $2,000 pretty much on average for everything. Some things are $300, some things are $1,500, yes, but generally speaking, most of his stuff is hovering up there, but certainly between $1,500 and $2,000 a whack, and that's expensive, and it's a lot. It's a lot of money. And it's a lot of money to me, and it's a lot of money to almost all of us, almost everyone out there. And to some people, it's ludicrous, I know. But you know what? If you build that market and you've got the reputation and you've got the product to go with it and you've got the secondary for it there, in my mind, you're just parking money in something that's probably more stable than the stock market is right now.
Yeah, definitely more stable than Bitcoin.
Right, or that, So I think of it kind of like that. I mean, that's not why I collect. Truly, I collect because I like knives, and I really appreciate the work that goes in. The quality part is huge for me, for sure. The execution, that kind of thing. I mean, that part is really my appreciation is there, along with what I mentioned earlier with the camaraderie part and having the people around me and around the hobby and that kind of thing. But the having the idea of having a strong secondary and the idea of having something that's got value later is big, and it allows me to justify in some cases the ability to just spend the money.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think that like the reason why you collect is genuine and heartfelt, right? But collecting is not without risk. And I think all of us, right, especially when we think about hard-earned money, are into risk mitigation almost as much as we are the joy of things. Yes. So I totally can see that. Like I don't know that I would want to spend $500 to $2,000 on a knife if I didn't think that maybe if I really needed to, I could sell it and recoup my costs. But I have to. It's like a boat, right? I mean, if you finance a boat at $45,000 and you can only sell it for $15,000 or $18,000, well, I don't know. Everybody knows that that's basically the boat business, but not knives, and knife makers have a finite number of knives that they can make, and I'm interested. Do you think that a knife maker that appears to be more prolific or is more prolific is more desirable to invest in than somebody who makes a small batch or fewer knives per year? Like, does the quantity or like that factor make that much of a difference to you?
I think it makes. Well, I will say this. I mean, having the ability to, if it's something I want, having the ability to get it matters. And so having a little bit of volume can be nice because it means I have a shot. And it means that, also means that that's potentially balancing out maybe the supply demand curve a little bit, right? Because it sort of helps, in my opinion, it kind of helps take the heat off, if you will. Maybe if there's like one of these flying around, and you do, if this person builds one knife a month, 12 a year, and the odds of you getting a hold of one are slim to none, and the value and the secondary market's hot for it, I know immediately, the price is the price of entry is going to be higher. So from that perspective, it is nice to have somebody that's a little bit more prolific, if you will, who's able to put out a little more product just to get get knives in the hands of the buyers, and the collectors and so forth. So I do think that there's some appeal to that. I'll use a modern folder guy, Michael Raymond, as an example. And he's an interesting example, maybe not a great example in some aspects because his work has gotten so expensive and so forth. Rightfully so. It's beautiful work. But, he's one of those, I've owned several of them, and I don't have any currently, which I kind of kick myself for because there's one particular one that I shouldn't have sold, but you know how that goes. And so, he's one of these guys that's like, it's just a struggle almost to like think about even trying to own one for me because the price point, whether I'm willing to put up the money is a question, number one. So, and whether I can afford it too, there's a legitimate, like, don't know if I can actually afford this really, so I have no business buying it kind of thing. There's that element. And that's kind of where it's gotten to, especially with him, because there is no supply. It's just flat out, there's just no supply. Why? Because he's a perfectionist 10,000 times over, and he makes a knife that nobody really can make other than him and a few other people out there, but there's not many that can make a folder like he makes it to the exacting standards. And so are they worth what he sells them for and what he's getting? Yeah, I mean, sure they are. They're worth it to some people, and I think that the value is probably there. Is it a little disappointing to me as a collector sometimes that he doesn't make a few more knives? Yeah, a little bit. That's just my problem, right? I mean, it's nothing other than that. That's my problem. I mean, if I held on to some of the ones I got for better prices, I'd be okay. But at this point in time, I'm a little behind the curve. I think good for him. That's a business choice. He's made that choice. And it's probably a good choice for a guy like him that can do that. I mean, he basically makes art knives, but that aren't art knives exactly in this sense of the traditional sense of what we think of what an art knife looks like. But his quality level is in that art knife world for sure. It's way up in there. And there's plenty of art knives, that sell for tens of thousands of dollars all the time. And there are people out there that buy those. So, am I bitching and moaning about it a little bit? Yeah, a little bit. But but truthfully, just to answer your question straightforward, I mean, I would love to see him maybe make a few more knives. I mean, yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, you're capped anyway. If you're talking about handmade stuff, you have a ceiling anyway. So I know that you're not going to be able to produce too much unless you start going. I don't know in the fixed blade world if there is a mid tech, but unless you start going more production oriented or something like that, then that's a different conversation, I feel. But as long as we're talking about, pretty much sole authorship, what have you, handmade, customs, so forth. I mean, you probably can't make too many, is my guess.
Yeah, I think based on time, because I have a full-time job and everything, maybe I can make it's like 30 a year.
Okay.
Maybe a few more. When I was doing shows like aggressively, and you want to take like 10, 12 knives to a show, you could do that for 3-4 shows a year, and it's all new stock rather than, if you sell everything out. Right. That's different. But like Stefano Nardelli is a Italian knife maker. His stuff is insane with his quality, but he is a perfectionist, and he's I actually tried to get him on the show here to talk to him about stuff, and he's like, my English is not really the greatest, and I'm kind of a loner, so he flies helicopters in Italy. But I think he does like rescue stuff or something like that.
Crazy.
But his stuff is immaculate too. But his output is very low, and it's it's that way because that does interest me. It's like, how do you balance all this stuff out as a maker? Man, I don't know. That's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is because there is knife making and the knife industry is an enigma. And even though, like, I think that maybe in some ways I got it licked, in other ways I feel like no, I don't. And every aspect of knives is really like that when you come from the maker perspective. And even when, like, in the small amount of collecting that I've done, because I'm also a collector, but not to the same extent. I notice all these makers. I look at them with a collector's eye. Like the slip joint cartel is a perfect example of those guys. Kind of collectively, their stock is raised over time, and their knives are pretty desirable. But Luke Swenson was telling me that there's people that come by his table and say, like, oh, I didn't come by because you're going to be sold out. And he's like, I don't know who keeps telling people this, but they need to stop, because I'll have my knives, like some knives I'll take home. He was telling me that, like, there's only one show, I think it was Blade, Texas last year, that he sold out everything that he made, but he'll always take knives home. And it has something to do with this reputation or this ambiance that occurs with his reputation, that people think that he sells out within the first few minutes of a show, and it doesn't happen. And so he'll sit there through the entire show with knives on his table, with collectors that probably would buy his stuff if they didn't just assume that he sold out so quickly. So it's kind of weird. Like, all of us kind of have these weird idiosyncrasies and things like that occur in our careers, and I don't know if there's one magic bullet to really solve for it.
Well, I think you said it earlier. You stick to what you do well, and you also stick to something you love. And I mean beyond just the knife making part, but I mean, like, finding your whatever it is about your knife making and your designs and what goes into that, your blood, sweat, tears that goes into that. You are best served generally by, in my opinion, you're best served generally by sticking to, the honesty part of that equation, being true to thyself about what you're doing, and the rest will follow. And generally that's true. And, to talk about to just comment on your slip joint cartel. I know all the slip joint cartel guys, some better than others, but I've known them all. And I know Luke, and, and I talk to him at every show, and I've had actually the same conversation that you just brought up about going home with knives and stuff, and it wasn't with Luke, it was with a few other people, but we were talking about knives getting sold at shows necessarily before the show starts, and like the night before, or the morning of, before the doors open, between collectors and stuff. And so I was having this conversation with a few unnamed makers, and that exact point was made, which is that, and it's hard to argue with it effectively, which is, if you have a ready buyer, it's there, ready, got cash, ready to pay now, do you sell it or do you not sell it? At this point, maybe that's the day before the show, maybe it's the evening before the show or something like that. You want to have product on the table, yes, but you also don't want to go home with it in your case either, because a lot of these guys will tell me, there's been plenty of years that I went to shows, set up, didn't sell anything, packed it all up, and had to go home. And so it's really hard to tell me that if someone's standing there ready to buy something and they got cash in hand, that I shouldn't take it. And so it was this conversation that, it was mainly a conversation around should you sell your product before the show opens, let's say, or something along that line. Because people do show up. Maybe somebody like myself who's looking to collect something to get a knife from so and so, and then you get there and they are gone. And it's like, I came here first, right when the door opened, and you don't have anything on the table. Well, it's all gone. That's a struggle. I mean, it's a good position to be in if you're able to sell all your stuff. So, that it's hard to knock, but there is a fine line there too. I don't know. I mean, you can't make everybody happy, but I do think that if you're in a position to, maybe there's a happy medium there. Maybe you're able to sell a few here and hold some back and that kind of thing. And I do know Luke has won several awards in the past 3 years, 3 to 4 years, his knives have been winning a lot of the show's awards. Not all of them, but a lot, but several. And well deserved. And he makes a hell of a slip joint. And he's a great guy too, I'll add. And very enjoyable, lots of fun, funny guy. And and so I I wish him nothing but success. And at the end of the day, that's why, the reputation. I think people think that because he's gotten pretty hot in the past few years, he's won these awards and so forth. I think most people think that they probably won't. He will be sold out, and that kind of thing. And it does happen. And these shows, like Blade Show, there's so many people there, and that's why, like, if you have a ready buyer, if you don't sell like now. They go spend their money, four tables down, and then it's gone, and so you don't get them back usually. That's what happens.
Well, and I like to Luke's credit. I feel like he's always put the integrity of the show first over his profits, because what he was saying is that the point of the show is to present a show, and if you're selling off all your stock beforehand, then what does that do to the venue? And, Bill Ruppel especially has kind of conveyed to all those guys that, we're here we're here as much for the venue as our customers are for us. And so you do have some responsibility, because that's the draw. That's the reason why you see kind of certain makers get preference, as it were, on tables and everything, because they draw crowds in. And if you sell all your stuff out to a dealer, which that's primarily who does it, is you go to the pit the first night or the night before the show starts, like on Thursday night, and the pit has everybody there, and the dealers start taking fat wads of cash out and saying, hey, I'll buy this knife and that knife. I've already been kind of eyeing on social media, and then you're kind of faced with I can sell enough to make my table cost and the trip. What do I do? And whether that's one knife or a few knives, if you're doing if you're selling multi blades and they're $1,800 to $2,700, you sell 2-3 knives. Well, maybe you only brought 7, so you got to kind of figure: do you sell them all? Do you sell some of them? And what does that do to your reputation with the average Joe who wants to collect a knife but then can never? It's no different than having books that go out 4 years, 5 years.
Yeah, no question. And yeah, you're right. And, Ruppel, I've heard him say that same thing. And, he's a guy that his knives sell instantly, though, and he always has a table full when the door opens. And then about 20 minutes after the door opens, they're all gone, pretty much. So, I guess all the makers would strive to have that kind of demand, right? That would be a great thing. And I just think, I think you're right about they having the idea that they owe at least the opportunity for the venue to, have product on the table. So when people walk through the door, there is something to actually look at, touch, feel, hold, that kind of thing. So I do think that you're right about that, because at some level, they have an obligation back to the promoter, if you will, to have a good show and to have product there. But it's it's interesting business, is what I would say. I think you said that earlier. It's kind of interesting. It's it can be big scale, but it's really not that big at the end of the day, and there's only a certain number of people out there that are really participating in it at any one time, I feel. And they move their money around, and things get hot and things are not, and trying to stay in that. It's from your perspective, I would think I can see how it would be challenging to make certainly a full-time living, like if you were to commit to making it a full-time job, right? At the end of the day, would you do that? Would you even want to do that? Maybe the answer is no. Maybe you wouldn't want to do that. But, there are examples of people that have done it, and that we mentioned already. And I had this conversation with Enrique Pena back years ago, right around the time that he was really starting to think hard about doing the production stuff. And because I was motivated to try to get him to make me traditionals, which he didn't want to make anymore because the dollar per hour equation was not work, because he's a perfectionist and nothing would come out of his shop, that wasn't absolutely right. And if it, he'd throw it away if it weren't perfect. And, which appeals to me, of course, but at the end of the day, I was having the hardest time getting him to. He'd say, yeah, okay, and then I'd never hear from he wouldn't call me back, and we'd talk and stuff, and he started talking to me about the production side of stuff, and we really were talking hard about brand. It's very resonant to this conversation tonight, which is we were talking about building a brand. Really, is what we were talking about, and even he who, at that point, had a name, sure, but I mean, I think back to that era, and we're talking about maybe 2014, 15, getting into that timeline. And, he was well known in the small circle of slip joint collectors and stuff. He was well known as having made a really fantastic knife, but it was a very specific traditional pocket knife that was at a price point that only a certain number of people would buy. And other than that, really, quite honestly, he didn't have a fully established brand. He had a brand in his name, yes, but there was a concerted effort there to really brand it and turn the corner and provide something to the market that he could sell in quantity and so forth. And I know you're not exactly discussing wanting to go that direction fully, but there are ways I think in this business, if you will, there are ways to use those examples. Let's say, the Ozer example, or the Ben Belkin Jack Wolf Knives example, or Enrique's example. There's ways to maybe blend different ideas from different places and, figure out for yourself, I think, what it is that makes sense for you. And then you stick to you follow your heart and you follow your mission. You go execute on your mission and you're true to yourself. And generally, if you do those things, you will have success.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really great perspective. For me, I have a full-time job. So, for me, it's like everything in knives is about, I guess it's probably about the esoteric side of knives, more so than selling. Like, for instance, like I can't compare my experience to Enrique, because the reality is he wants to have more product out there for a broader audience to establish himself as like a household name, right? And so you have to go like semi-production for that, and you can maybe charge $300-400. Well, I can I can make a $400 blade and not sell it at all. So I don't have the same problem. I have the problem of selling the knife itself, not building a bigger, more accessible knife. So I can make a nice handmade knife for the price of a semi-production knife or a production knife from Enrique, and it's a completely different set of problems that I have. So it helps to navigate that because, like, by talking to you, because really, at some point in time when knife making to me is like, how much skin in the game do you have, and what does it actually mean? If you're going to continue with it, you pretty much have to double down, or you just get out of it because you don't have that much skin in it. Like, if nobody's buying knives from me, then I have to make the decision on, well, am I going to continue doing it because I love it and it means something to me and it validates me? Or do I just say, maybe this like $100,000 in equipment and handle material and time and energy is something that I just kind of like, sell off and I do something else. Maybe I'll get like a nice old car or something instead. Maybe I'll be able to travel to Europe back and forth for the next 6 or 7 years with the proceeds. And that's kind of where, like, I'm not in that like that mode. Like my goal is to like get very much deeper into making, to continue doing the podcast and trying to expose some of these things, because I think that a lot of people ask these same questions, and I'm like like heavily invested, and it is because I don't rely on that to feed my family. If it was that, then I would have a different conversation with myself entirely. But at least for now, I really just want to make a good knife, and I think I've gotten there. And I really just want to be able to sell it so that way it gets in more people's hands to really kind of get that feedback. Maybe I should do like a 30-day money back guarantee.
Where do you sell right now?
I sell mostly online and at shows. So I mean, I have a website. I'll list stuff. I don't really like. I'll say it like mark something off if it's available. But for the most part, if I post pictures up, I don't. I won't sell it on Instagram or Facebook. It'll go directly on the website. That like I'll market it basically, and I'll sell it on the website so that way everybody knows what the price is. Because something that I've really kind of distrusted is when somebody puts up something that says available and then they talk to one person about it being $450, but if there's like 9 people that ask for it, they jack the price up behind the scenes because they can't, because the demand's higher, right? And I'm just like, my price is my price. It's not a lot, but you get that. And if it sells and you want another example of it, I'll make it. Like usually I don't have material so finite that I can't make another one. But that's kind of where I stand. So I don't know. Maybe wishy-washy. I don't know. I kind of.
No, I don't think so. I think you do need to say what's your website?
It's a lsknifeco.com.
LSKnifeco. Okay. Well, maybe we just need to put the knives in the hands of some people who are out there posting them some and get a little bit of grassroots marketing going for you. Maybe that's what we need to do.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, I'm really big into, if knives don't sell, that I try to donate some for like good cause raffles, and I'm especially big. There's it's Operation Triage in South Texas. It does home renovations and building and stuff for veterans. And so, like, especially on my tactical stuff or pretty much anything, if I see a knife that I'm like, I think they'd probably do pretty well at auction, I'll send it down to Dan down there. And I think one of my Patriot Warrior tactical knives, they're like tactical fighters, auctioned off for like almost $3,000 down there. And that really means something to me. So it's like, okay, like it cost me maybe $150, $200 to make, maybe more. Maybe I took I ate it on table cost, but I'll just donate it. Well, my wife and I were up at do you know who Steven Ranella is?
No.
He operates this it was on the Outdoor Channel, but it's a meat eater. It's a hunting show. And my wife and I were up there for a book signing that one of my other hunting buddies was one of my best friends, but we do a lot of hunting and fishing together in the past. And he told me about it. We went up there, and I said, "Hey, like I have one of these knives. It was a Tony Bowes desk knife, fixed blade that I had made with some real nice butterscotch micarta."
Very nice.
And I was like, dude, like I mean, what do I care? I'm gonna give it to him and just like have some hands on some of my knives from somebody who probably uses a lot of knives. And so I gave it to him, and he was like taken aback a little bit at the gift. But I said, it really means a lot to me that from a conservation and awareness about hunting and the ethics and whatnot of it, it means a lot to my family that you do this. So like, here's this knife. And so for me, like I'm never really opposed to giving knives away or letting people like handle them or whatever. And honestly, a money back guarantee is not necessarily a bad idea. I don't actually see that in knives today a whole lot, unless they're production knives and they're from a reputable dealer or whatever.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I guess, I guess you could look at it like standing behind your product kind of thing. I suppose that's tough. I mean, certainly if you were doing it for a living, it would be harder to do. It's easier to do if it's a side gig, that kind of thing, I suppose. But I would have to ask myself, is it necessary? Or does it make the difference then for somebody? How much of a difference does that make for someone then buying, like entering into the purchase transaction as opposed to not, by offering that? I guess that's the question you have to ask yourself, if it makes a big enough difference or not. And I don't know. I tend to think it might not make as huge a difference. I mean, maybe it would with some folks, but I kind of feel my gut would be it's not absolutely necessary. Certainly a stand, a stand behind the work piece and all that, but I don't know. I mean, you could try it, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't know. I throw around ideas like to see if they make sense, and then I think, I don't like that idea.
Right.
It's mostly because like my knives already come with a lifetime guarantee. Like,
Right.
I mean, the life being my life,
Right.
but like don't send something to my daughter and expect her to sharpen it when I'm dead. But yeah, they come with a lifetime and satisfaction guarantee against like flaws. So I mean, if something is wrong, then obviously I want it fixed. And if you don't like it, then I want to know probably sooner than later too, because it's a lot easier for me to give you your money back than spend it.
I think a return policy, maybe 30 days is a little bit much, but I think certainly a return policy type of thing is certainly fine. You don't see that so much. There's some makers that would certainly do that if you bought from them and just got it and said, man, it's not resonating with me, that kind of thing. There's some. Most, I think, are of the opinion that once it's sold, unless it's defective or it needs to be fixed, which they'll fix, it's sold. And then it's you own it, and then you go deal with it. So that could set you apart, I guess, a little bit like that, I suppose. But I don't know that you need to be so aggressive as to say 30 days. That's a lot. I think a week, maybe, something like that. 1 week, kind of a buyer's remorse, cooling off period, whatever you want to call it. A window of time within which to return it if you're not satisfied. I mean, that, it's a nice gesture, I suppose.
Well, I think that, like, for guys like you who are, like, I think financially responsible, and what I mean by that is that I don't think that you would make a purchase on something that you instantaneously regretted and be like, okay, I need to return this because I spent too much money. But that's in the industry today. Like, that's why we can't have nice things, because I can't tell you how many people, like, when I had to get out of doing books because people would be on the books and maybe I wouldn't have like more than 20, 30 people that are interested in work and say, hey, yeah, like, I want the next thing that you come out with. And then you get to them on the list and everything, and they're like, nope, sorry, something came up. Like, I've had that happen probably 30 or more times. And that's a rough one, because if you make a knife that's something that is, marketable to that person at that time, and then you have people just constantly bouncing out of it, it makes it difficult, because, you have like these knives that still linger around for a while because, somebody got a little bit too specific. And then, I also feel that there's a responsibility when you're keeping books to make sure that you're fulfilling those orders. And I also wanted to do shows, and it's like, how do you, like, you have your books that you need to keep because those are customers that you've already committed to buying, and then you have shows in addition with that. So it's kind of like, I don't know how you navigate all that. Like, I have 9 million questions and 0 answers sometimes, and so I'm the kind of like wait it out, think about it, and ask smart people like you, and get you on the podcast and talk to you for 2 hours and try to figure out, like, is something about that makes sense. But I appreciate you. I appreciate you and the responsibility that you carry in collecting knives, and the maturity and integrity that you hold when you do that. I feel like I've looked at a breadth of your collection that you've expressed online since you were on these Facebook groups, and every single one of those knife makers, I respect their work incredibly, and I know them, and they're good people, and that is speaks volumes about the kind of people that you're looking for. In addition to like the materials and things like that I think you have an affinity towards, it really shows if you're collecting the person and the relationship, it really speaks a lot about the kind of maker that you value. So, I thank you for everything that you do for us.
Oh, well, thanks. And I appreciate it. I'm humbled and grateful that you would ask me to be on here. And I'm sorry I took up so much of your time. I hope that you have people that'll listen for 2 hours. But it's been enjoyable speaking with you. And I certainly would be interested in. I'll have to take a look at your a little harder at what you're making, and I might be interested in commissioning something from you as well. So.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, at the very least, if you want me to send you some stuff and you take a look and critique it, I'm always open for that. I mean, it's no different than what I did with the guild or anything. You know, if there's people that I respect their opinion and insight and it's always something that I want to get better at. Because I don't ever think that in this industry that we all have it dialed in 100%. There's some knife makers that are incredibly good that I'm just like, I don't know how you even make this stuff. But
of course,
for the rest of us, I think that there's always areas of improvement. So anytime you just let me know. And if you want to get into collecting fixed blades, since I've been in it a long time, and also eyed a lot of makers for like in the secondary market and whatnot, I'd be more than happy to kind of point you in some different directions, because there's quite a few names that I know of that are just make incredible knives that are also pretty highly desirable in the secondary market. So
okay, cool. I will hit you up.
All right. Well, you have a good night, and thanks again.
Thanks, Aaron. It's nice talking to you.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.